Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Can we just get a definition of what fresh water is, what it encompasses?
So water is defined in the Act, the Resource Management Act, and it talks about water, talks about coastal water and wastewater. So water in pipes, tanks and cisterns isn't considered to be water. And then it speaks about geothermal water, and that's from memory based on probably chemical composition and temperature, and coastal water, and the rest is fresh water.
So then, therefore, fresh water includes water from aquifers?
Yeah, most definitely. Lakes, rivers, streams, groundwater, aquifers, if you'd like to call them that. Yeah.
So why, when you take out, say, the potable waters that might come from aquifers, there's not a lot of reference here to aquifer water. One of the things that fascinates me, Chair, is that we place an economic value on everything else that comes out of the ground, the gas, the oil, and we license it, and government clips the ticket on it, and we don't seem to put an economic value on water and the extraction of water, be it from reservoirs, rivers, lakes, or aquifers. And I'm just wondering, have we canvassed that thought of saying to government there really needs to be a value on water? I'm not suggesting that we jump to the conclusion that every gallon that comes out of the ground has got a cents per litre charge on it, but there doesn't seem to be an understanding of the economic value of water by way of attaching some kind of value to it, like we do other resources. Do you get my drift? Well, have you cast your mind to that?
Sure. I would say the National Policy Statement talks about values of fresh water, not only financial but ecological and social and cultural values, and they all need to be reflected in the implementation. And as far as this proposed reform goes, they talk about economic use of fresh water, improving the economic use of fresh water through providing guidance, not only in terms of efficient use of all those types of fresh water you talk about, stream or river aquifers, in the rural setting in terms of, say, irrigation, but also in terms of the urban setting in terms of municipal use. So that is in there. They talk about it in the discussion document, and I guess the closest to part of it, the document that refers to financial value would be the transferability of water permits, and they speak about that in terms of recognising that water has a value and that the greatest value of water in financial terms, I guess, to some degree, would be achieved through a system of transferability of water permits where the highest value of water would bubble to the surface, if it were. And so you can transfer water at the moment, and we recognise that in the submission, but they're speaking of improving the system of being able to transfer water through highlighting where people have surplus water and the like. So I think it is covered there. It is probably...
So through the chair, look, there is a lot of discussion around the value and the rights and ownership around water at a national level going on at the moment. And as Councillor Cashmore pointed out before, actually the value we're going to have to put on it within an urban context is going to be significant because of the cost of fixing it up in our urban areas. So that is part of the national discourse, absolutely. It is.
So there might be some consideration about the charging of water like we do other resources that come out of the ground. And I'm sure there's exclusions to that, like customary rights to water. And I'm not jumping to the conclusion that we're going to charge for potable water for somebody that's got a bore and they're in some remote community and they rely upon that. I'm talking about the commercial extraction So there is some thinking, because we're not submitting on that. Is it of value to submit on that, to get that conversation sponsored?
Well, those conversations are happening at the Land and Water Forum, so at those levels they are, and also around the most economic use of that. I know if you look across the country, you look at the varying uses of water, the power companies versus tourism and primary production. There's lots of discussions in that space.
Okay, I'll leave that there. Look, a lot of this I support, and I'm happy to move or second to whoever's leading this body of work can move. I'm happy to see recognition of the ecological, like freshwater ecology rather than just freshwater in isolation, and marrying up that relationship. I think if we just talk about water quality, we miss that overall picture of what water quality allows for. So I think embedding that in there is important. I think you've captured it well. And of course, water quality has to be life-supporting to get those ecological outcomes. But the third bullet point on A48, which is your page 3 of your submission, it's on our page 48. It's the third bullet point. It's got stream ecological valuation at the top, and we come down to enhancing freshwater values where there is a change to an urban land use. Why do you think we need the words "and where practicable"? Don't we have all the thinking at our disposal to actually enhance freshwater values, whatever the change in the land use is? Don't we have everything at our disposal now? It feels like an out. It feels like an excuse to do poorly.
Through the chair, hopefully that's not the intent. But one of the situations we do have within an urban context, and if we look internationally, it is an evolving process. So we have a lot of water-sensitive design, and we have a lot of innovation in this space, and then it needs to be tested to see through. When you urbanise a catchment, you will have an impact. That is a sort of a given, and there's nothing around the world that has shown there's been an absolute panacea to solving those impacts that you do have. Essentially where the practicality comes about it, essentially.
Okay, look, I just want to express, I think, I don't know, look, I'm not going to wordsmith this at this stage, but I think that needs to be a bit stronger. Now, if we go to stock exclusion, what is our submission on that? I'm reading the Rural Advisory Panel's information, but what is our specific point on stock exclusion? We've got something in the proposed Auckland Unity Plan, and that talks about barriers from memory. It didn't talk about fencing. It talked about barriers, but you could probably refresh us there. What are we supporting in our submission on stock exclusion, knowing that it is a big issue for Auckland, and of course we are connected to the Firth of Thames and the Hauraki Gulf, and we know all the data there that we've got massive nitrogen gains. They're not slowing down, and there is a big issue that we're facing. Otherwise we're going to see just decimation of the ecology of the Hauraki Gulf. So are we saying this is a big issue, or are we kicking it for touch?
We're saying it's an issue and that we support the introduction of the regulations that the government proposes. And my understanding is that the government would then draft some regulations, and then they would be put out for submissions. So they'll come out with some detail about proposed regulations, and then there'll be an opportunity to review and look at those. We support the introduction of national regulations, one, and we also support that we should be able to introduce our own regionally specific stock exclusion rules that relate to our region. So we'd like to retain the requirement that if there's a national regulation, that we can also have local rules that apply in our region as well.
Sorry, just one last question, Chair. So if there is a national rule, normally that's that's the that's the maximum. That's how it gets interpreted. So what do you mean when there might be, say, district or regional or unitary councils like ours with other rules?
So, an example, there's a regulation relating to measuring water takes. That's an existing regulation, and it says that everyone has to measure a water take that's greater than, say, 250 cubic metres a day. The council could say, well, actually, we'd like to have rules that require measuring water for less than that, 50 cubic metres a day. So they would be more specific rules that had, I guess, a greater onus than the national regulation.
Okay, and lastly, so Councillor Cashmore said there are some changes to this, but what are the changes? How can you just, with some brevity, just say what the changes are?
Perhaps I can make a comment there in terms of the grazing or the stock exclusion issues. Generally, it was to recognise that the measures that have been developed through the PORP had been through a collaborative process and had recognised a number of specific outcomes that could be better reflected. And so maybe it's just a case of saying we just wanted to make sure that in supporting the national regulations that we don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's been quite a bit of work done in this region with the particular issues in this region to actually identify some alternative or supplementary measures that would improve water quality through that process.
So through the Chair, what we've tried to do is we've been following a national direction on this to be very collaborative and build these coalitions where we can discuss all these things. So if we've come up with agreements in Auckland that fit well with the communities, everyone's happy with them, and they set timeframes, that would be a little bit problematic for us to get usurped, and then we have to, and so that sort of breaks up all the goodwill. So that's sort of something that we're pushing in here. So we're following your national process. Let's sort of adhere to what the outcomes of that are instead of coming over and maybe usurping that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is the exclusion again of stock from water bodies. I suppose what I'm asking is, I don't see anything there about the cost that will be, who will bear that cost in our submission.
Yeah, there isn't anything there that relates to in the submission about costs. So the proposal that the government's put forward in these reforms and to bring in a regulation were based on work that the Land and Water Forum did. So the Land and Water Forum is a body that the government supports. It's made up of various parties, NGOs, federated farmers and the like. They came out with a proposal, and I'm sure that they would have considered in their proposal the costs. They put forward a proposal for excluding stock from waterways by certain dates. That proposal has been picked up by the government and reflected in this reform document. And in that regard, like I say, the government or the would have considered the cost. We haven't considered costs or done a costing exercise. Basically said that we support the proposal that the government has promoted and been developed by the players, basically.
Yeah, okay. We have 5 kilometres of fencing if we had to fence off our streams. It will be broke tomorrow if that was to happen, just to say. And the second one regarding that is there's a longer lead-in for big animals. Are we saying a pig's a big animal, or where do we go? Is it sheep, or has this been already defined by the government? Yeah,
that's right. So in the reform document, there's a table. They identify a number of different types of animals. The stock that they identify are deer, pigs, cattle.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I suppose my issue with that is that we're not recognising that this will come at a cost to the Auckland economy, because farmers are part of the Auckland economy, $2 billion worth.
So through the chair, that is something that we're looking at in the context of Auckland, and we're looking at the context of like how are we going to look at some of these what they call FMUs, our catchments, and what are the best options for us to do that. So internally we are taking into account that and seeing where the balance lies, but we haven't landed on that yet. But it's not something that we're totally ignoring.
I think I would also just quickly add that as Andrew indicated before, a lot of these proposals came out of recommendations to the Land and Water Forum, but equally the Dairying Accord as well, with some of the bigger milk producers. So there's been quite a lot of debate and discussion about these things, and cost would have been considered as part of that discussion in the last few years.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
I had one more.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, so my other one is we're supporting here arrangements with iwi as opposed to the legislative process. And I suppose we can say that in Auckland because we have quite good relationships with a lot of the iwi. But this is a national program. Are we recognising that in other areas, I mean, Māori don't even get a walk in the door? So, I mean, we can explain the Auckland situation, but we should remember that nationally it may be totally different. Are we recognising that in our discussion?